why you think it hasn't been an acceptable career choice, and what's making it acceptable now?
Yeah. Well, it's nice to be back on stage. Thank you. There is this incredible entrepreneurial renaissance happening that I think is unprecedented in history, which is exciting. There's just more entrepreneurs practicing today than any time, I think, ever in the history of our civilization. And so there's a lot of things that are making that possible. Part of it is, entrepreneurs go through these boom and bust cycles. You may have noticed we're in the summer years at the moment, and as we say, winter is coming. But in the meantime, there's incredible capital flowing to entrepreneurs everywhere. There's an incredible interest in entrepreneurship. There's people making movies about entrepreneurs. So entrepreneurship is very cool right now, and that I think is actually a transient thing. Entrepreneurship, for those who don't know, is actually not cool. It's incredibly boring and excruciatingly difficult and really embarrassing as you're doing it. It's anything but cool. It's nothing like what you see in the movies. You should know. The entrepreneurs in the room are nodding their heads like, yeah, good enough, I know, totally. So that phenomenon, I think, is, it's here with us for a moment, but it will pass. But the underlying fundamentals of what allows someone to become an entrepreneur is changing dramatically in really interesting ways. So the cost of starting a company is just coming down every year and inexorably getting cheaper. But more so, to me, much more interesting than it's getting cheaper is that it's getting faster. So you can run more experiments more quickly. Think about even 5 years ago or 10 years ago, if you wanted to create, a new, e-commerce site, you wanted to create a new retail product. Think of all the people you would have to get permission from to do that. Like investors and banks to finance the creation of your product. If you wanted to advertise your product, you have to go big. People would let you put up billboards or magazine editors, or who knows what kind of all the different gatekeepers you had to get permission from to believe in your concept. Never mind retailers and channels and warehouses and distribution partners. The complexity of it was immense. And the semiconductor revolution and the internet is just collapsing down all those steps to allow you to go, in a lot of cases, from concept to first test, in a matter of hours rather than months or years, and at incredibly low cost.
But just because it's easier to be an entrepreneur, does that mean that everyone should be an entrepreneur? I mean, everyone can't be an entrepreneur, right? And nobody's working for them.
Yeah, that's right. So in addition to, so the tools, the means of production are being democratized.
Companies need employees too.
Do a little I've heard that, yeah. And not everybody wants to be an entrepreneur in the sense of being the company founder. Because let's face it, all of us have ideas, but most of us don't have very good ideas. And I understand not you, but the other people in the room. Right? Your ideas are brilliant, I'm sure. And when you're in the shower, everyone's ideas seem brilliant. So what is happening is, in addition to these technological changes that are making it easier to become, to test new ideas, we're developing what I would call a management science of entrepreneurship, which is really new. In previous eras, the people that became entrepreneurs, people who were wealthy enough and connected enough and crazy enough to leave the established structure and go take a risk on a company. And in a lot of cases, if it didn't work out, that was it, and they would kind of go back into the realms of regular, the regular organizational man structure. And now it is possible to embrace entrepreneurship as a career, which means you can study what makes someone a great entrepreneur. You can develop your entrepreneurial skills. You can put those skills to work as a founder. It's easier than ever to do that. But also as an early employee at a startup, as a late employee at a startup, or even as an internal entrepreneur inside an established company. And one of the things that surprised me the most as I've been traveling and meeting people and talking about these ideas is that there's actually a really common set of challenges and a common set of skills that work in all those different situations.
What are those? What does it take to be an entrepreneur today? What are the characteristics?
There's a funny thing about the personality traits of entrepreneurs in that every single one of them cuts both ways. So if you look at the academic research on entrepreneurship, and there isn't very much, and we need a lot more of it, but what exists and is any good, founder personalities is something that's been studied. And they have these characteristics that are correlated with the likelihood that someone will become an entrepreneur. In the academic literature, they all have funny names, like ability to ignore inconvenient facts. And I can't remember, they're basically they all have to do with basically not looking at reality clearly and looking at it incorrectly in a way that's convenient for the entrepreneur. And as well as if you're very charismatic, you convince other people to do things, and of course we get other people to believe second set of questions, which is great, once you're an entrepreneur, then what are the personality characteristics that make you more likely to succeed as an entrepreneur? And now those same characteristics cut the other way, because inability to see facts eventually starts to get in the way of your ability to run a business. And so if you're completely crazy, then actually entrepreneurship is no good. But if you are at least a little bit crazy, you never get into it in the first place. So part of what we are doing is trying to help people figure out, where do I fit in the entrepreneurship ecosystem? Where are my skills best used? But then, given whatever your skills are, whatever your personality is, how can I hone those skills to make them more entrepreneurial, right? Give myself more comfort with uncertainty, which is really one of the fundamental things in entrepreneurship is. It's the domain of extreme uncertainty, where you don't yet know who the product is, what the product is, you don't know who your customer is, you don't know what's going to work. You're trying to discover, explore, learn those things. So those explorers' instincts are things that I firmly believe can be learned, can be taught, and people can develop. So that's that's a big part of what this is about.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the concepts in the book. You talk about products and startups as experiments, right? You have to look at them and treat them as experiments. What does that mean? And a lot of experiments blow up. So
yeah, the word experiment has the kind of popular meaning, which is just kind of try stuff and see what happens. And I'm always telling entrepreneurs, if your plan is to ship something and see what happens, then you're guaranteed to succeed at seeing what happens. Something will surely happen, and then you can claim whatever happens as if that was a success. And that's not science. That's not an experiment. If I was a chemist and I told you that was my plan, I'm just going to do chemistry by going into go find the NYU chemistry department, go into the chemistry lab. I'm just going to start throwing things together and just kind of see what happens. You'd be like, that's dangerously unsafe. You're probably not even going to be alive an hour after that. And certainly not doing any science. At best, you'd be doing alchemy. So when we use the word experiment in startup context, we're trying to get people to be much more scientific about the things that they do in a startup. And so experiment is something that has a hypothesis. You have a prediction about what's supposed to happen so that you can compare it against what actually happens and figure out if you're on the right track. And that's actually really difficult because most of us have been trained to write business plans that predict the future accurately. And basically, we believe you write a good plan, you execute that plan, things happen as planned, that means you did a good job. If things don't happen like it's said in the plan, that's a failure and you can basically kill it. That's the basis of what we call the stage gate product development methodology, right? If you're not on plan, you get fired. But in entrepreneurship, we can't make plans because we don't have the long and stable operating history needed to make successful forecasts. And so what we have to do is always be asking ourselves, not how do I make this product, how do I achieve this specification with minimum effort, but rather how do I conduct this experiment with minimum effort. So we're always working backwards from what are we trying to learn to what do we need to do. And when we think about our work that way, it unlocks really fast shortcuts that we wouldn't otherwise have thought of. Because if you're talking to someone who's got this grandiose product vision and you're like, okay, I'm going to make a really crappy prototype and try selling it to some customers and see what happens. Someone who's made a business plan is going to think, that is a terrible idea. I only get one shot. I want to make that shot as good as possible. I'm going to wait as long as possible before showing it to anybody so that it'll be perfect, maximize my chance of success. But if I was saying, what's the fastest way to get the learning I want, which is maybe, do people even want this thing if it worked? To learn that question, you don't need a fully functioning prototype. You can get that learning a lot sooner. So that's the key. That's how we're trying to get to start get real information about whether our vision is brilliant or crazy or some combination of both as quickly as possible.
You have this whole notion of a feedback loop, right? Which is build, measure, learn, or maybe not in that order.
Yeah, it's a loop, so you can't get out of it.
Yeah, right. Is this methodology, do you think it makes sense for all businesses, or does it make more sense for technology businesses where things are changing so quickly that, exactly like you said, you don't have the data, you don't have a long operating history, et cetera. I would think that this kind of methodology would be riskier in more established industries.
Yeah. If you think about a 2x2 matrix, once you become a professional expert like me, you have to start drawing 2x2 matrices. That's kind of law, I don't know. But think about a 2x2 matrix, and on one axis you have the question of what's the underlying level of market uncertainty in your industry. So, a business that's been in business for a long time, where nothing's changed in a static environment, follow-on products, that's very low uncertainty. High market uncertainty is You want to create a new social network, and it's like, well, I don't know, maybe people want that notebook, very right they want. On the other axis, you have what's the underlying cycle time of your business. For a very slow business, remember back when they used to put the year the product came out in the name of the product? Like Windows 95, or Office 2000. Like that tells you something about the cycle time of that business. It means that most new products once a year. And, my last company, IMVU, would do something called continuous deployment, which means we're doing 50 releases a day on average. So our cycle time is dramatically collapsed, and this is spectrum in different industries or in different places. In that top right quadrant, where you have high uncertainty coupled with fast cycle time, that's the domain of the lean startup. But what's happening is, if you ask yourself, where's my industry moving? What's the direction of movement? Everyone I talk to in every industry feels like they are on a one-way ratchet on both axes in only one direction. The world is getting more uncertain every day, more market uncertainty in every industry, and cycle times are only coming down. So there are businesses today that I think really these ideas would not be appropriate for, but I always tell people, just call me in a few years. Because we're all being pushed by the same underlying forces into that quadrant where we're all going to face these ideas. And that, for those of us who are in startups, this is great news because those tools of disruption allow us to, kick the butts of all kinds of incumbents. To our colleagues who are actually in those incumbents right now, it's a source of tremendous heartburn because the tools that they were trained to use as managers, they're not working anymore. But yeah, I do think it's important to say the context in which these tools work. And if you think about this as entrepreneurial management, as a discipline of management that deals specifically with high uncertainty situations, I'm not trying to say that that's better than general management or it's designed to replace general management, the management that we owe everything to. When you look around, every object in this room was created using the tools of 20th century management. We're all alive and clothed and, I assume very happy because of those tools. We thank those supply chains, we thank those managers for making that happen.
How much of that are you suggesting that we set aside or throw away, or is that something that maybe is not appropriate until your organization gets a certain size?
Yeah. It's actually, I think of it as a portfolio. So all companies have to do some general management and some entrepreneurial management. What changes as they grow is the ratio of those two activities. When you're completely starting out, you have nothing to manage. It's all entrepreneurship. But as soon as you have even one customer, you immediately face the problem of having to multitask. Because now you have a question. Should I cater to the whims of this customer, or should I focus on getting the next customer? And as soon as I have 10 customers, then I'm going to have 20 opinions about what I should do next. And already I'm starting to have this portfolio problem of different kinds of things I have to do. God forbid I have investors, or a corporate CFO, or a spouse who I'm accountable to. I have to start showing them that I'm making progress. As soon as I have anything at all, then I have something to lose. And so what happens is as we grow, as we get more established, we have to spend more and more of our energy on those kinds of general management problems. Planning and forecasting is still very important. Making sure that we don't damage the asset and we continue to monetize and all the good stuff that managers are trained to do. What happens is if we let that become 100% of the portfolio, then we're really screwed. Because cycle times are coming down, entrepreneurship is getting cheaper, and all of you get to do it. Which means if any of us have any kind of success, the amount of time between when you have success and you can depend on fast followers coming and trying to eat your lunch, that used to be decades. I mean, think about the old General Motors. Going public, I think, in the 20s, and then having decades of unparalleled dominance of their industry. And now companies like Groupon and Zynga, they're not even gone public yet, and they're already facing not even hundreds, thousands of competitors who are trying to eat their lunch. So as an established company, as a successful company, if you're not continuously reinvesting in creating the next round of innovation, building what I call an innovation factory, then you're really in big trouble in this climate.
So a lot of the ideas in the book and just in your blog past year, that they sprung from your own experience at IMVU. Right?
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about specifically this idea of fast feedback loops, and also sort of the bigger notion that you were a little touching upon but didn't really get at is how do you know that you're addressing the right problem? I think there's a story in the book about sort of there were frustrations at IMVU. It seemed like you were sort of tweaking the product and making incremental improvements, but you were actually you found out later that you were solving the wrong problem. Yeah. Tell us a bit about that. Sure. How do you know that you're solving the right problem?
This is one of the most frustrating problem that any entrepreneur faces. We call it the pivot or persevere decision. So, fundamentally, I want to know that I'm on the right track. If I'm on the wrong track, I want to find out as quickly as possible and switch to the right track. But psychologically, as human beings, we're horrible. Because we just deeply want to believe that we're right. And I tell you, when I was an entrepreneur, everything I did, every person I talked to, every market research study that I read, everything made me even more convinced that my idea was great when I was in the idea phase. I mean, I would walk around, it was like confirmation. Yes, you agree with me? I know, I'm so brilliant. That's so stupid. Every person, I couldn't see anything. If someone's going to criticize my idea, they're like, that person's so stupid. Right? I can't believe the ignorance that they just revealed in saying those inane things. And we would have an argument, which I would win every time. It would always come around to my way of thinking. And of course, what's happening is I'm just seeing the world through very, very specialized tunnel vision. So that's what we're trying to fight against. And all the specific techniques around measuring progress that are about being startups is about getting us out of that bubble and into confronting the cold hard truth of reality. So at IMVU, we spent months building this product that, we're going to go into a lot of detail, but it was an instant messaging add-on product that was supposed to interoperate with all the different IM networks. We were building this 3D avatar product. We thought instant messaging was the hot, new, cool social technology because it's 2004. We wanted to build the next AOL, back when that was still cool. And we thought of that as what we were trying to do. And then, to make a long story short, it turned out that our IM add-on interoperability strategy was completely stupid. Customers absolutely refused to behave the way that they said in our business plan. We would bring in a feasibility test. We'd explain the business plan to them. It was, it's messaging has network effects, and you need to spread virally to your friends. And they would just look at us and be like, "No, not doing it." She'd be like, "We're paying you to be in this stability test, so you're going to do it." And we'd be like, "No, I'm not going to do it." Because we had this fundamentally wrong idea of what their behavior would be, and they thought our whole value proposition was so bad they wouldn't do it. But it took us a long time to actually listen to those people, because the first time that happened in a focus group, I knew exactly what to do. I turned to the person who arranged the focus group, and I was like, "Fire that customer. How did you find this person? You're like, I can't even pay to use my product. Go find me another one." And the second one would do the same thing. And the third one would do the same thing. And at a certain point, I'm getting mad at this guy. I'm like, "You're the worst focus group arranger ever. How did you find these 3 people in a row who all feel like that can't be right?" But after 5 people, and I say, "Gosh, do I have a statistically significant sample?" Well, part of me is like, no, you don't have a statistically significant tell thousands of people. That's for presidential elections. But when the signal-to-noise ratio is this high, you're clearly on the wrong track. So that kind of information, that's actually a blessing. I have to tell you, as an entrepreneur, it seems like that would be the most painful thing, and these customers hate your product and won't use it, but actually it's a blessing, because it's really obvious. If you have the courage to show your product to anybody at all, they will immediately reveal to you that you're on the wrong track, and you can just kill it dead and move on. This product that we built, people wouldn't even download it. It was that bad. But that's actually the easy case. The curse, the way you wind up in the land of the living dead as an entrepreneur, is because we fixed that product, we pivoted to something that made more sense, and then we spent months improving that product and getting some customers. And some customers is way worse than 0 customers. It wasn't like it was taking off, it wasn't going to the moon, we weren't having great success. But on the other hand, it wasn't so bad, it wasn't 0, so we couldn't kill it, because it's still our baby. And any of you who ever actually done this exercise will know what I'm talking about when you say, you start to become a conspiracy theorist. I really started to freak out, because here's what would happen. Every day, we would pay Google AdWords $5. That was our marketing budget, $5 a day. In those days, you could buy clicks for 5 cents a click. So every single day, we would have 100 people come to our website, and I was like, awesome, half of them are going to buy it. And in the early days, it was exactly 0, so that was pretty easy. That's clearly wrong. But pretty soon, we got to the point where 1 in 100 would buy our product at a 1% conversion rate. And then it started to get really weird, because I had this feeling gosh, every single day, exactly 1 out of 100 buy the product. Did they get on a conference call with yesterday's customers? Everyone, okay, everybody, how many of you bought? Okay, 1. Okay, well, 1 of us, because it was so consistent day in and day out. And it felt like it was a conspiracy. Someone's trying to make you crazy. It was a conspiracy. And it was fine at first. It was a couple days in a row, that's no problem. Because, we're making the product better every day, we're fixing bugs, we're adding features, like eventually that number is going to go up. And then months passed when it was exactly 1% every day. And we finally had to ask the really hard question, which is it possible that the things that we're doing that make the product better are not actually making the product better? Are we just indulging in things that we care about, but we're not aligned with what the customer cares about? And that was a really difficult realization, but that's the key to knowing it's time to pivot. Because if you measure properly, you can realize that what you think is important is out of alignment with what your customers, not what they think is important, but what is actually important to them. Does that make sense?
So what were you doing? What was the product, and then what did you have to change that was fundamentally different that you couldn't see for those months?
Yeah, we had to totally give up on the idea that our product was going to spread virally. And everyone's like, oh, viral is good. Viral is like free customer acquisition. Everybody wants to be viral. But not every product can be viral. For those that aren't familiar with the kind of theory of this, a viral product is not just a product that has good word of mouth. A viral product is one where other people are forced to sign up as a side effect, a natural side effect of me using the product. So like when I'm sending money through PayPal to my friends, I'm automatically infecting them with the meaning of PayPal. They don't get to choose, right? An epidemic, a virus is not optional. You know, like, I'm sitting out of Ebola, not interested. Right? Just that's not how it works. It's automatic. So products that spread that way, have to be built a certain way to make that work. Not every product can be viral, because not every product people want to use with their friends. And we had a product that turned out, to make a long story short, was very good for helping people make new friends. So it was much more like a dating site than a traditional social network, which we didn't understand. Most people don't want to bring their friends onto the dating site with them. That's not the point. The point is to meet new people. So that's the company's job to bring new people. It's not my job as the customer. And I already know my friends, and if I wanted to date them, I don't need the dating site for that. I'm not going to pay the dating site to help me meet. And also, a social network is designed to be used for life. LinkedIn and Facebook, you're going to have a long-term relationship with that company. You're going to have high retention. A dating site with high retention is a failure. People don't want to be on a dating site. They want to get off the dating site. You're supposed to help them. So it's a completely different acquisition dynamic, what we call an engine of growth. And it took us, that was really what we had really misconceived. Because we were spending all this time making our product easier to use, which meant making it easier to bring your friends. And here's the thing I want really, especially to the designers in the room, people who've been trained in the importance of design. Designers are skilled at making products easier to use. That's actually the key part of that discipline. But we're used to working on products that already work, that people already want, where making it easier to use, like every incremental improvement you make yields incremental happiness for customers. If you're building the wrong product, making it easier to use just helps customers realize they don't want to use it sooner. That's actually not good, that's actually making it worse. And it's totally backwards to what our intuition was. We're making the product easier to use, which meant making it easier to invite your friends, which is an activity our customers absolutely positively did not want to do. And so, therefore, the work that we were doing every day, even though it was technically brilliant, if I do say so myself, as the chief technology officer, even though the design was excellent, as my co-founder, who used to work at IDEO, will tell you, beautiful design. We liked everything about it, but it wasn't actually impacting customer behavior in a positive way. And so, that you have to put yourself in a position where the data can get you over the head with that, so that you can stop wasting your life. It's not you, but maybe your friends.
And sometimes the timing as well. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if you saw the winner of Disrupt, which, was like 10 years later, 6 years later, trying to put virtual worlds in Facebook.
Yep.
Do you think that they're doomed, or do you think it's the time to eventually?
Well, I pretty much think they're doomed. I mean, no offense to, I'm sure they're a great team. But that's because I've just cracked my head at that problem so many times, and I'm like, well, no one's more brilliant than me, so if I couldn't make it work, obviously nobody else could either, which is like just totally ridiculous. Maybe they have found an insight that I don't have, if that's possible. Or as you say, sometimes markets develop, and so sometimes what wasn't right in the past is right now. And also, the details matter a lot. So I really try hard to resist the urge to be like, oh, Dropbox, like yet another file sharing thing, like file sharing for apps has not done well, therefore Dropbox is not going to do well. So of course now we know Dropbox is huge. And what makes Dropbox amazing is in the detail of the specifics of how it works. Change it a little bit and you would destroy it. So sometimes it's just a very narrow chasm you have to kind of thread your way through to really make something work. So it could be an idea that's whose time has come. It still seems intuitively right to me. I still believe people should want it, but now I've got a bruised ego if I couldn't make it work. So for nobody else.
Let's talk about this idea of a minimal viable product.
Yeah.
Getting out there with the, not necessarily the full product vision, but something that is acceptable, to customers. And maybe tell us through the stories of some of the companies you deal with in the book. You have sort of a Facebook and Groupon and Dropbox. About how they created this minimal viable product. And many times it's not even using technology, right? Like Groupon is using PDFs and
that's right. So minimum viable product, or MVP, is one of the most important concepts in the startup. And it follows directly from what I said before, that a startup is an experiment, so our goal should be to get the learning as quickly as possible. And that kind of sounds good when I say it. It's like, who doesn't want to learn as quickly as possible? That seems good. But then there's consequences to agreeing to that statement that then a lot of entrepreneurs are like, wait, hold on, I did not sign up for that. And so get this. Minimum viable product says, anything you do beyond what is necessary to figure out if early adopters will give your product a try is a waste of time, no matter how good it seems. And the Groupon guys learned this the hard way. Because for those who don't know, before it was called Groupon, it was a product called The Point. And the idea of The Point was to create a social petition site that would help people do group actions against their city government, or try to petition for stuff. I don't totally understand what it was for, but it did not work. It was think of it as petitions plus, and you just spent a year and $1 million building out this back-end infrastructure for, and the group still tipped in the same way that, Groupons do today. You still have to get enough people, everyone agrees to go be part of the protest, they do it. So they built all this infrastructure, built all this startup, so they spent, I think, $1 million in a year, and it didn't work. And they decided to pivot. Here's the thing. A pivot is a change in strategy without a change in vision. So they didn't just say, well, we give up and we're going home, we're not doing anything else. But they also were we still have this vision of people taking group action, but the political thing is just really not working out. What else could we do with this group action idea? And they're like, why don't we try group coupons? But they didn't then spend another year, another $1 million, because they didn't have it. They're like, okay, we got to do what we would now call MVP. Who knows what the first Groupon was? Anybody? Very first? Pizza, yes. I was actually just in Chicago on my book tour, and I got to go eat lunch at the restaurant, still today, in the lobby of the building where Groupon is. There's a pizza restaurant downstairs, and they made a Groupon for 2-for-1 pizza in the lobby of their own building. They put it up on a WordPress blog that said Groupon and nothing else. 20 people redeemed the coupon. And they, literally, they're sitting there on their Apple laptop using, PDF Maker and emailed out 20 handmade PDF coupons to the 20 people who had bought the 20 pizzas. Now, I don't know about, I certainly was not smart enough, but maybe you are. Think about, if you could go back in time and hang out with the Groupon guys, and they're just like, guess what? I just sold 20 free pizzas. Would you be fastest company in history to get to $1 billion? Well, it would be more obvious, right? Of course. If I've been there, I'm totally, I want to invest in this. Is the next big thing, pizza for everybody. As an outsider, you would be like, come on, that's ridiculous. And this is why we always miss all these great disruptions, because they always start out as a toy that seems ridiculous. But first of all, because they had failed at the point, they understood just how significant it was to get 20 people to do anything at all. Actually, surprisingly, did you ever try to do this? Surprisingly difficult to get 20 people to do anything. And that because they had used really cheap, MVP technology, just a blog, just a laptop, they could immediately roll through this build, measure, learn feedback loop directly into the next Groupon, which I think was for a free t-shirt. It was really it started off with really trivial, simple stuff, and it allowed them to get into the flow of figuring out, hey, we think we're on to something.
How did people find the Groupon?
Yeah, in the first Groupon, they got their investor to mail it out to his old. They have an investor in common with a big company, and he was basically everybody has to go buy pizza. They had their boss being everyone has to buy this pizza, and only 20 people buy. It's really hard to get people to do anything, let alone buy free pizza. So It really was a lot more difficult than it looked from the outside, but because they had that experimental mindset, they were able to do those experiments cheaply, easily, and realize they were onto something.
Right. So another idea that you rail against is sort of what you call vanity metrics and success theater, right? People talking about how many visitors came to their website, or some number that seems big, how many text messages they sent, but it doesn't really have any impact on the actual operating metrics of the company. And I think Facebook is a good sort of counterexample of that, where they focused on sort of unique metrics to them that they thought were, sort of showed the success, the early success, even when it was contained within just, a few colleges.
Yeah.
What were their metrics, and what's the difference between what they did and vanity metrics?
Yeah, I remember, I still remember when Facebook raised its first 2 rounds of funding. If you've seen the movie, the basic scheme of the movie is correct. They moved to that house in Palo Alto, they did run into Sean Parker on the street, and they raised money very quickly thereafter. At that time, they had on the order of 10,000 users and no revenue to speak of. They had taken over 3 or 4 college campuses really fast. But they raised money at this crazy valuation, and a lot of people were like, this is a return to the dot-com era. People are just having no business plan, no business model, makes no sense. But if you go look at the data that they were able to show to their investors, they were able to show 2 things that were really powerful. I call them the value hypothesis and the growth hypothesis, just more being formal, but it's very simple. It's how do you know that customers find your product valuable? And in Facebook's case, it was because something like 70% of the customers use the product every single day. Basically, they were addicted to Facebook and they couldn't stop using it. That's a pretty good indicator that they found it valuable. And second, how do you know the product will grow once it's valuable? And that was really easy. Every time they went onto a campus, I think it took them, on average, 2 weeks to go from 0 to 100% market share of everybody on campus using it. So if you look at a business like that, you're like, well, are they going to be able to grow this business? Right? Yes, I think probably they will, because they just go to more campuses and give the addictive product out for free, and then everybody starts using it in 2 weeks. That's actually a very straightforward business. And then, is that going to be a valuable business? We call it a value hypothesis, because is that going to be valued? Well, they're collecting this huge asset, which is going to be, very quickly, millions of people's time and attention. And then they're going to resell that to advertisers. And that's like, if I'm telling you I've got a business where I'm going to dig diamonds out of the ground, the same stuff, these 2 big fundamental questions. If I dig into the ground here, will there be diamonds? And 2, if I had a giant pile of diamonds, could I sell them to anybody? Now, which is the riskier hypothesis? Right? I hope you were like, well, obviously, are there any diamonds there? Because if you had a pile of diamonds, of course, you can sell them. And so in Facebook's case, it was really clear that they did have a business model. It was going to take a while for them to turn it into a monetization model, which is something different. Because they were focused on those, what we would call actionable metrics, right? Per user metrics. How addicted is each person on average? How fast do they transmit the virus to their peers? And not on the vanity metrics, the gross numbers. They were able to both raise money, but also just know that they were on the right track. By contrast, vanity metrics are great for, getting TechCrunch to write about you and then make your competitors feel bad about themselves. It's really good for that, and I'm all for it. And it's like, I'm all for that. The reason we're happy to have TechCrunch write about those numbers is because we know that they don't actually reveal any information about our business. They just make our competitors feel bad. So it's like win-win. I don't actually tell my competitors anything useful, but I do make them feel bad. I used to be I'm the CTO, and you get a phone call from your CEO all the time. He's like, so-and-so random company just got a thing on TechCrunch, and they've got, we were a virtual world company, so it would be like, they have a $4 billion GDP, user-to-user transaction volume. And he'd be like, how big is our GDP user? And I'm like, what is that? What do you mean GDP? GDP is like, measure countries that way, like when they have a central bank. It doesn't make any sense at all for our business. I always do want to listen, we don't ignore that, because look, we've got, we may not have that many customers, but we're making money for each customer. And CEO would be like, okay, yeah, I hear that, but $4 billion GDP, how many are like, that seems so big, but is it really that big? The companies now, there's this huge trend now, we're joking about companies being like, we had 100 million messages sent on our platform. And it's like, well, that does sound like a lot. But is it? Is that 100 million people who tried your product one time and churned out? Or is it one guy who really likes your product? You can't tell the difference between those 2 extremes, so you don't know anything. And when the vanity metrics fluctuate as they do, it causes tremendous confusion because everyone always thinks the numbers go up because of whatever they were working on at the time. But what happens when the numbers go down? Oh, well then now it's seasonal effects. Or it's, well, yeah, they would have gone up, but those idiots in marketing screwed everything up. Like my team did a good job, but so it really preys on this weakness in the human mind. And you can watch it now. I mean, pick your favorite product is being launched and people are talking about it in the press, how many millions of signups they got. I mean, we were talking about Google Plus the other day. And I just saw today, Google Plus down 60% traffic from their peak. And it's like,
but that's also an estimate. I mean, all these numbers.
Yeah, nobody has a clue.
In defense of journalists and bloggers, I mean, we only, can report the numbers that we can get. And if you guys actually open up the internals of your websites, then you can do a much better job.
Well, to be clear, and also to be in defense of journalists, you guys are the audience for this information. Okay, you guys give your attention to TechCrunch yourselves into advertisers, and therefore companies pay publicists to try to figure out how do we manipulate journalists to write about us, which is why we give out the vanity metrics. We give out vanity metrics because you'll pay attention to them, right? So if readers were like, "That's stupid. That makes no sense. That's ridiculous," we ridicule companies that did that.
And your point is that it hurts the companies in the long run.
That's the challenge. Is when you start to use vanity metrics as a tool, it's fine for making your competitors feel that. But you inevitably start to believe your own story, and that's when you get into trouble. Because, I don't know, these companies with like the GDP growth, but like when that number goes down, all of a sudden it's a problem. I'll tell you the story from a company that I used to work with. They had on their homepage a counter which was something like number of people logged into the product right now. And it was this number, it would kind of fluctuate up and down. And it was like naturally seasonal, like during the day more people would log on, and then at night more people would log off. And it turned out that it wasn't even measuring the number of people using the product, it was a great vanity metric. It was like basically measuring the number of people who had the program installed who also had their computer on. Okay, so it's not exactly the most useful metric ever. But like, the company could not actually convince their employees that anything was going well unless that number was going up. Because everybody could just log into the homepage and be like, wow, 4 million, wow, that's huge, that's so great, we got a record number. And then if the number was down, but the CEO is being like, no, but we're doing great, the employees would be like, he's lying to us again. But it's got even worse than that, because then everybody would launch their favorite feature on Monday, and if you timed it right, you would launch your feature right as the seasonal effects were kicking in, and you'd ride that number up, and you'd be like, look, my feature is awesome. But if you had bad timing and it went down, you'd be like, no, guys, this is a horrible metric. Don't pay attention to this. Look at this other data. So everyone was like, not only is my CEO lying to me, but those idiots on the hall lying to me too, because they're going to cover up their own failure. My projects always get the number go up. And it became this like circus of people trying to figure out how to manipulate that number. And
you've got to be careful with what you measure.
Yeah.
Right? Because people will focus on that, and then they'll, they'll tune the product and their activities towards whatever is measured. And we see that
absolutely.
We see that everywhere in terms of, even how do you tell a writer at TechCrunch that they're doing a great job? I mean, you could look at page views, you could look at concurrent views on Chartbeat, but that's not really the best metric, right? The best metric is something that's hard to quantify. Did you break news? Did you have the best sort of take on this news, the best analysis? Sometimes that translates into those numbers, sometimes it doesn't. So how do you know what numbers, to measure? And it seemed to me from reading your book and just talking to you that it's a different answer for every product.
Mm-hmm. That's true. If you get what you measure. That's just the truism of human behavior. So if you measure writers on page views, like you can look at half the sites on the internet. You know what kind of headlines you're going to get 5 seconds later. You get pictures of cute cats and the same 10 stories that everybody else would read. So measuring the same vanity metrics that everybody's using in any business is a recipe for destroying your differentiation. And I always tell people, if you're just optimizing, trying to do whatever it takes to make the most money, you're going to be selling porn in any minute. Eventually, you're like, someone's going to be like, why don't we just try a psychic hotline? That's going to make us money. It's like, that stuff works for a while. That's how people get stuck in Ponzi schemes and all kinds of other nonsense. So the truth is, actually figuring out the right metrics is hard work. That's why most people don't want to do it. I think that the way you figure out what metrics you really need to measure goes back to what I was talking about with Facebook, the value hypothesis and the growth hypothesis, right? If your product works as you think it does, how do you know that you're creating value for customers? And in some businesses, that's as simple as, do we have positive margin on each customer? Do they give us more money than it costs us to service them? That's a very easy way to tell, but that's not true for every business. There are businesses that have to measure, like Facebook did, based on the attention or engagement they get from customers. Then, given that we're making this, creating this value for customers, then how is it going to grow? And that's where these concepts I call the engines of growth in the book, I think, are so important. And they're kind of complicated, and they're not that, this is we're talking about accounting now, okay? So just everybody understand, this is all about how do you do accounting in startups. And like, you came to a talk about startups, it's supposed to be cool and exciting, it's like, it's entrepreneurship, and now we're talking about accounting. And it's like, boy, it's gone downhill fast. But the truth is, this boring stuff matters, really is what determines the success of startups. So we're going to talk about accounting, okay? In each engine of growth, the way you know you're creating sustainable growth is that the new customers you get come from the action of past customers. And so there's this feedback loop, this relationship between past and future customers that drives growth. And that can be as simple as you take the revenue you make from past customers and you reinvest it in advertising. That's going to work for some businesses, but it's not going to work for tech firms. You just don't buy traffic. You have to get traffic through some other source, and that makes sense because you're not a buyer of traffic, you're a seller of traffic. So you just think, like, logically speaking, if everybody was buying their attention from somebody else, we'd have a reductio ad absurdum. Like, eventually somebody has to be able to get attention and resell it from some other source, and that's where the other engines of growth come from. In a viral business, new customers come from the viral epidemic we talked about before. They're actually being infected by past customers. And so the metrics you focus on there are not lifetime value and cost of acquisition and marginal profit that you would have paid. You focus on the what we call viral coefficient. For each person who comes into your site, how many more do they bring with them? And it doesn't have to be, I'm talking in terms of websites, but this can be true for physical products too. And then the third engine of growth is what I call a sticky or engagement-based business, where your customers are actually, your new customers are your past customers coming back. So remember, for a dating site, this isn't going to work because customers don't want to be engaged for the long term. But if you have a product that builds a durable brand that customers return to regularly, they subscribe to it in some way, they're addicted to it, they stick with it, then that is a business that can grow through basically compounding interest. Because then the natural, organic, word-of-mouth growth that any good product has can compound because you have close to 100% retention of customers. If you had a bank account, that suffered attrition, then you would have a problem getting those compounding effects, as many of us found out in the recent financial crisis. But that's not how it's supposed to work. It's supposed to be just like it does, in your textbook. You just, you have your principal at stake, and you would get that compounding interest period over period. Eventually, you get that superlinear growth. So you really have to identify which loop are you trying to go through, and then gear your metrics towards measuring how fast are we going through that loop on average.
So, we talk a lot about sort of lean startup methodology and getting your product out to a viable product and testing and learning and building and doing this full feedback loop.
Yeah.
So the big counterexample I always think of is Steve Jobs and Apple, right? He is not the lean startup approach, right? He's the build it and they will come approach. Famous for saying you can't show a focus group the future because they don't know that they want it.
Yeah.
And especially with his passing away and all of all the eulogies and remembrances that everyone talking about, like how he built Apple. One thing that I know just reading through all of that is it just keeps on coming back to he kind of saw where the future was just about to be, right, in terms of technology evolution and sort of aiming a little beyond what's possible today, not too far right ahead, and then just being confident in that future and then building a product that would meet would meet that future right when the product came out. So I guess the question to you is, this all sounds great for 70-80% of startups out there that can use sort of more refinement, etc. But if you want to build the next Apple, does this help you at all?
I really want to take this question seriously because it's been very much on my mind. I didn't think I was going to be that affected by Steve Jobs passing. You know, I've always resisted the hype and the kind of cult personality around it, even though I've been an Apple fanboy since my original beige Mac Plus, in my room. It was the first computer I ever owned, so I love those products, and I have every Apple product that you can buy. But this idea that like Steve Jobs is like a product saint, he just magically makes products come out of his mind and they appear, is totally ridiculous. So I always like, after this, all this hype is ridiculous, so I really try to resist it. And so, when he passed, I didn't think I would be affected, but I was surprised, how much he has meant to all of us. And it's prompted a lot of conversation, a lot of reflecting on this question. When I thought about it a lot, I said, you know what? First thing is, we all want to be Steve Jobs. Let's just be honest about it. And so, how do you do it? How do you follow in his footsteps? And I think that's actually a really good question for us to be asking. And the Steve Jobs I admire is actually not the guy standing on stage with the whole world, applauding him for his new products. I think a lot about the Steve Jobs who had the courage to build the Apple I. Anyone ever seen an Apple I? It does not look like an iPad. When it came out, it was not unveiled on a giant stage. Nobody thought it was going to change the world, and it was a hobbyist hit. It barely did anything. So it's important to remember, first of all, that most of us are not in the position of being where Steve was at the end of his life. We have to think about how do we compare where he was at the beginning of his journey, because we're at the beginning of our journey. And even Steve had the courage to build what we would now call, if you go look at pictures, it's in the Computer History Museum, go check it out. It is your classic MVP. It barely does anything. But still, we can't ignore the fact that Steve Jobs was a visionary. And I want to be really clear, I admire that in Steve, and I encourage visionaries to use these ideas. Because here's the thing, visionaries will always I used to get into huge fights with my visionary co-founders. I was a CTO, we would often get this huge fight, and I would like, we gotta measure stuff with data, and they'd be like, dude, customers don't know what they want, okay, so this is a waste of time. And I never knew how to answer that. I was always like, I would always be like, no, that's not right. We do have to talk to customers, but I was like, but they don't know what they want. So I was like, God, there's something right about that argument. And I just want to be super clear. Customers do not know what they want. Okay? Let's just stick with that. That's just a fact. Any of you spend any time with customers will know exactly what I'm talking about. It's infuriating. But imagine I was a scientist, and I'm like, I want to do physics, but I can't because electrons don't know what they want. That's what you're talking about, and that makes no sense. What makes Steve amazing to me, what I admire about him, is that he had the courage to figure out what customers actually wanted and then put his ideas to the test. To me, that's the lesson of real artistship, and the saying that he was all about building products and putting them in front of customers and letting the market validate that he was right. And the problem with the story as we know it today is no one really knows what happens behind closed doors at Apple. They were very happy to have us all believe these ideas occurred fully formed out of Steve's head. They never did any testing of any kind, and then they just put them on stage and everybody bought them. I'm sure they're very happy with their competitors to believe that too. But I don't believe it. There was a significant process of testing and iteration that happens at Apple behind closed doors. And we don't know, I don't know, if anyone knows, please share it, because I don't know how it works. It's probably not Lean Startup, and they may probably have a different method. They may even have a better method, and we may all be doing that. And if that method is better, I'm all for us doing it. But I think that I really believe that taking a scientific approach to our vision is a way of honoring those visions to the maximum extent. Because part of the rocky path, look at all the crap that Steve had to go through, including constantly being fired and being second-guessed and questioned and not having the support of the people in the ecosystem around him. It was because he didn't have any way of evaluating his claims. He was right all the time, most of the time, some of the time, we don't know. But you couldn't tell. Sometimes he was just nuts. And how can you tell the difference between crazy and right? Well, I think when we look back on this time, we'll laugh at that. My hope is that the next generation of visionaries will have people around them who are dedicated to supporting and nurturing that vision, who can use science to show that this person is actually right. Just what you said, they're going a little bit ahead, but not too far ahead. We can show empirically that we are actually hitting that sweet spot, and then we'll actually be able to then bring on the rest of the ecosystem with this evidence. Say, look, I got the accounting to show that this guy is actually a visionary and not just some joker putting on a black turtleneck.